but someone knows something, yet everyone plays ball. I say we round them all up. Let's brain fingerprint them all.
Hello everybody, this is Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases, but also as time passes I've been covering other cases such as the Staircase or OJ and many wrongful convictions of youth. I go over the documents, the photos, the videos, anything case related, so stay tuned because I have many more videos just like the one you're about to see. Hello everybody, we're back again today. We're going over another one of the Amicus briefs that were filed in favor of Brendan. This one was filed by the law enforcement trainers. You may remember when Brendan was at the 7th Circuit Court, an Amicus brief was filed, a Amici brief, was filed by the law enforcement trainers over at Wicklander and Zawalski, a professor of constitutional law and the Juvenile Law Center. So they all got together to make that brief for the 7th Circuit. So, and there was the classic quote in it of we use the Brendan Dassey interrogation as an example of what not to do when interrogating a juvenile. It was a very powerful quote from the Amicus brief that was at the 7th Circuit Court when Brendan was still at the 7th Circuit Court. So, interesting. So, we're going to go ahead and get into it here. This is as I said, the law enforcement trainers brief. This is the people that train detectives and law enforcement all over the country to be investigators and do investigations and conduct investigations and that sort of thing. This is one of the main ones in the country that does that training. So, anyways, we'll get on into it. Hello, everybody. How you doing? We're here today to talk about the Amicus brief that was filed by the trainers of law enforcement. Basically it's Wicklander and Zawalski, and also obviously there's a few others that were involved here, but Wicklander and Zawalski is the big one because they're the second biggest facility for training law enforcement officers in the methods of, or at least in how to do interrogations and investigations and things of that sort. So they're the second biggest one. So their opinion matters, I believe. I mean, they obviously know a thing or two about this. So you guys may remember before that in the 7th Circuit case, or when the 7th Circuit was hearing Brendan's case before the 3-judge panel the first time, the Wicklander and Zawalski and some other people, amici curiae, filed a brief in there. And you'll remember they're the ones that said that they used Brendan Dassey's interrogation as an example of what not to do when interrogating juveniles. So you'll remember that quote probably sticks out. So that's who these guys are. So they point out a lot of stuff in this brief here. There's a few things that they point out that I just thought were very, very interesting, especially the way that they construct their argument about whether or not the investigators should have been able to realize that Brendan had some limitations and that they should have immediately stopped and taken that into account. But they never did that. They just plowed forward, and it's one of the things that really makes the whole situation look so fishy, because these are trained investigators, that are trained to sum people up on a dime. They're trained to figure people out and that sort of thing very quickly when they're investigating, because that's what they have to do when they're in an investigation. They have to think quickly. They have to make sure that they don't let a suspect, a certain person walk away that they may need to take down to the station to talk to, maybe before they let the person walk away. So there's a lot of, they learn to read people and stuff like that, and to suggest that they had no inkling after a weekend, multiple interviews with Brendan, that they had absolutely no inkling that he had, limitations, that he wasn't, that he at least had a pretty severe case of social awkwardness, and that he was willing to agree with them. I mean, it showed. You'll see here in the brief, folks. So we'll move on into it right now. We're going to see what the summary of their argument is, and it's just, laid out pretty plain and simple. Here it is. Boom. So we'll go into that right now. Here we go. The law enforcement community has long recognized that the age, sophistication, and intellectual capability of the person being questioned are all critical factors that must be examined when conducting an interrogation and when assessing the reliability and voluntariness of a juvenile confession. Brendan Dassey, an intellectually impaired 16-year-old boy with a borderline IQ, is serving a life sentence because the investigators in this case employed interrogation techniques that are well known to lead to involuntary, unreliable statements when used with juveniles and those with cognitive deficiencies. Due in part to the notoriety this case has garnered as a result of the popular docuseries Making a Murderer, interrogation specialists have used video footage of Dassey's interrogation in training courses to highlight unreliable practices to be avoided and to show what not to do. In interrogations involving juveniles and individuals with intellectual impairments, Dassey's investigators engaged in conduct that infected the interrogation in pernicious ways. Contrary to proper interview procedures, the investigators did nothing to account for Dassey's age or cognitive impairments. They applied subtle coercive pressures, made false assurances and suggestions of leniency, and shepherded Dassey to correct answers by divulging critical investigative details and using leading questions, false evidence ploys, and similar tactics. These are precise practices that contribute to the uniquely high rate of false and unreliable confessions among juveniles and intellectually challenged individuals. From a law enforcement perspective, this case is representative of the deeply concerning way in which juvenile interrogations too often are conducted throughout this country. It features textbook examples of coercive practices that cannot be squared with the need for special care in such interrogations. The court should grant review to reaffirm its holdings that the age and intellectual capacity are critical considerations in custodial interrogations, to demonstrate the correct application of its precedents, and to provide guidance that will assist law enforcement and courts in avoiding the use of improper interrogation tactics and reducing the incidence of coerced and unreliable confessions. The petition for a writ of certiorari should be granted. Alright, so this next part's going to just kind of walk us through here the various, tactics that were used by Wiegert and Fassbender that really they shouldn't have used. When you look at the Supreme Court precedent and everything, they really shouldn't have used with a juvenile, especially one with, limitations. And like I said, it's... I find it laughable and foolish to even suggest that they didn't realize that Brendan might have had some limitations. That's just, laughable and ridiculous. It is. Okay. Especially when you see what you see later on in this brief, that it was actually pretty much right. Like, they were slapped upside the face with the fact that Brendan was guessing, and they just... right on through, just like nothing happened. Unbelievable, really, but we'll get to that in a minute. So they're just gonna now go through some of the tactics, whereas like they were endearing themselves to Brendan, saying, we're your friends, and the whole, we're not cops right now, we're fathers, and we have kids your age, and all those various things that combined with some of the other tactics that they used, and how all of these things combine together to make the reliability and the voluntariness of Brendan Dassey's confession ridiculously slim. So we'll move into it. Here we go. Investigators Mark Wiegert and Thomas Fassbender conducted multiple interviews of Dassey over the course of several days. Throughout those interviews, Wiegert and Fassbender set a confusing and ambiguous tone with respect to their true role in the investigation, presenting themselves as father figures rather than police officers. In one interview, Fassbender told Dassey, for example, "Mark and I, we're cops, we're investigators and stuff like that, but I'm not right now. I'm a father who has a kid your age too, and I just want to come over and give you a hug because I know you're hurting. Talk about it. We're not going to let you high and dry. We're going to talk to your mom after this, and we're going to deal with this the best we can for your good, okay? I promise I will not let you high and dry. I'll stand behind you." So these things could have Brendan thinking these guys are on his side. The officers emphasized that they were here to help, and that they were his friend right now, and that they were in his corner and on his side several times throughout the questioning. Wiegert also placed his hand on Dassey's knee in what the district court described as a compassionate and encouraging manner. Developing a rapport and expressing empathy are common and generally acceptable techniques in adult investigative interviews, but applying these methods to interrogations involving individuals of Dassey's age and of Dassey's cognitive and social deficits is problematic. Sawalski, practical aspects. Here the investigators blurred the line as to the motive of the interview and the serious consequences attendant to any statements Dassey made in response to their questions. Moreover, in establishing a decidedly paternalistic dynamic, the investigators imparted an expectation of dutiful compliance. This type of approach is likely to have a coercive effect on vulnerable and impressionable subjects like Dassey. In this situation, the interviewee will learn to provide responses according to what is expected and what is positively reinforced from his interviewer adult. All right, so we're just kind of going through the list of things right now. So that was the tactic of using, like basically trying to act like they're his friend, and trying to act like, that they're his friend or father figure or father, or playing at being his father, perhaps, and stuff like that. So, yeah. So that's that technique. Now they're going to move into the whole false evidence ploy, the effect that has on a juvenile, especially one with mental limitations. And so, and it's going to be a list that it's going to kind of go through here, folks. So, it's going to be a few different aspects that they got to point out, that they feel compelled to point out. So we'll move on into it right now, where they start talking about having fictitious evidence. As we all know now, they had absolutely zero physical evidence against Brendan Dassey. It was basically the confession that ended up doing this whole thing. So anyway, all right, here we go. Let's move into it. Fictitious evidence techniques have their proponents and detractors among law enforcement, but there is consensus, even among supporters, that such methods should be avoided when interrogating a youthful suspect with low social maturity or a suspect with diminished mental capacity. Such individuals are especially unlikely to have the fortitude or confidence to challenge fictitious evidence, and may become confused as to their own possible involvement. The use of deceptive false evidence methods thus may cause an innocent individual to give unreliable statements that adopt the fictitious evidence supplied by adult interrogators. Okay, so that's the effect that, claims of having evidence that they don't actually have. That's basically what the effect that it can have on somebody like Brendan Dassey, who is juvenile and has certain social limitations and mental limitations. So that's clearly a no-no, and they're talking about in the law enforcement community that even the people who are proponents for interrogation and methods that, the way they are, say that with a youthful suspect or somebody with mental, impaired mental capacities or lessened mental capacities, those techniques are not good to use. They realize that. So, because that's what it meant by the supporters of, the boldest interrogation techniques. But like I said, even those people who support, everything about the current Reed method and all that stuff, know that it's not good to use it on youthful suspects or those with mental limitations. So yeah. So now we're going to move into the next part, where it's going to be talking about the fact that these investigators had pretty clear evidence that Brendan Dassey was guessing, and that's what was going on most of the time, and that they just ignored it and moved right past it. So here we go. The investigators here exacerbated the coercive effect of their fictitious assertions by coupling them with authoritative reminders to be honest, and coaxing suggestions that minimized the consequences of providing information that matched what the officer supposedly already knew. What happened? It's okay. It's not your fault. This can cause innocent juvenile interviewees to misinterpret the interviewer's intentions and fabricate information to please him. Thus, when asked to confirm facts that he did not know, Dassey repeatedly responded by guessing at what he thought the investigators wanted to hear. For example, in one exchange concerning whether the victim's hair had been cut off during the commission of the crime, Dassey struggled in responding to the investigators' questions, providing various conflicting statements, and finally telling the frustrated officers that he was merely guessing at the right answer. Fassbender, the first time we talked to you, or the second time, you talked about cutting off her hair. Where did the hair go? Did you cut off her hair? Brendan, yeah. Fassbender, where did that happen? Brendan, in the bedroom. Fassbender, what'd you cut her hair off with? Brendan, the knife. Fassbender, the knife you found in the garage? Wiegert, it doesn't make sense. Fassbender, it's impossible. You took her out to the garage and that's where you got the knife. Explain how that can be. Did you cut her hair off? Brendan, no. Then why, Fassbender, then why did you tell us you did, Brendan? Brendan, I don't know. Fassbender, do you remember telling us prior the last time that you saw that stuff in the burn barrel? Brendan, yeah. Wiegert, so why did you do that? Brendan, I had too much stuff on my mind. Wiegert, so now you remember a little more clearly? Okay, how much of her hair did you cut off? Brendan, a little bit. Wiegert, you told me a couple of minutes ago you didn't cut any off. What's the truth? Did you cut some of her hair off? Brendan, no. Fassbender, did anyone cut her hair off that night? Brendan, no. Shakes head no. Fassbender, where did you get that from? I mean, it seems kind of strange that you just all of a sudden told us that you had cut her hair off. Where did you get that from if it's not true? Brendan, I don't know. I was just guessing. Why? Did you think that was... Fassbender, why? Did you think that was something we wanted to hear? At that point, the investigators should have recognized that Dassey did not know the answers to their questions, but was simply attempting to meet expectations by guessing the correct responses. Dassey's answers likewise made clear that he did not understand the significance of his statements or the gravity of his situation. At one point, after having just told the investigators of his involvement in a brutal crime, Dassey asked whether the interview would be over in time for him to return to school that afternoon to turn in a project that was due in his 6-hour class. Later, near the end of the interview, Dassey similarly asked investigators what time will this be done and whether he would be at school before school ends. When the officers responded probably not and asked Dassey what he thought was going to happen next, Dassey stated that he did not know. When told that he would be arrested because obviously we're police officers, which the officers had earlier claimed they were not right now, the confused Dassey responded by asking, "Is it only for one day?" Okay, so now we move on from the willful blindness of the investigators as to Brendan Dassey's clearly being in there guessing what was going on and that he didn't know what was happening. So we're going to move on from that. Willful blindness of the obvious guessing of Brendan Dassey, right? So now we're going into the whole fact feeding and how the fact feeding contaminated the interrogation. On top of all the other problems that there are with this investigation because of Dassey's age and mental limitations, the fact feeding contaminates the whole entire interrogation even more. On top of everything, it removes any chance at corroboration. I mean, all those things. It completely poisons the interrogation, and that's what they're pointing out here. So here we go. The investigators here repeatedly relied upon fact-feeding to elicit key admissions. Perhaps most troublesome was the investigators' questioning regarding the shooting of the victim. The investigators had withheld from the media evidence that the victim had been shot in the head. Thus, to corroborate Dassey's confession, the investigators pressed him for details about the shooting. What else did you do? Come on, something with the head. Dassey struggled to provide officers with the right answer. First, he responded that his uncle cut off the victim's hair, a fact which, as discussed above, he later stated was a guess. When the investigators continued to press Dassey for more, he tried different answers, stating that his uncle had punched the victim in the head and made Dassey cut her throat. Despite continued questioning, Dassey still gave no indication of any knowledge that the victim had been shot in the head. Finally, one of the investigators grew impatient and stated the critical fact. "All right, I'm just going to come out and ask you, who shot her in the head?" Dassey replied, he did, meaning Dassey's uncle. When the investigators responded, then why didn't you tell us that? Dassey responded that he couldn't think of it. Now, I've always found that particular phrase interesting from him. He couldn't think of it? Yeah, like he's talking about like when he was doing his homework, when he was guessing on his homework and stuff. And what he was telling them right there is, I couldn't guess what you wanted. I just couldn't think of it. Yeah, I've always found that wording interesting. So this is the exchange between Barb and Brendan when he says, you know, that they got to his head. The confession of a juvenile witness with severe cognitive and social deficiencies procured by coercive questioning that got to the witness's head is not a reliable confession. So, you know, as you can see, there's a ton of precedent that says that Brendan Dassey was coerced. Even some of it is the Supreme Court's own precedent, but some of it is what's been discovered out in the world by agencies like the Juvenile Law Center and you know, the law enforcement interrogators and, you know, the various agencies that, you know, the prosecutors, the current and former prosecutors. These people are out there every day in the criminal justice system having to, you know, and they know. They just know because they're there. They're part of it. They're in the mix, you know, or they were, you know, if they're former prosecutors, then they were in the mix, you know what I mean? So it's, these people know and have a deep fundamental knowledge about how the whole system works and how this is something that needs to be addressed. So I think Brendan's got a pretty good chance, really. I mean, I think it works out in Brendan's favor that this issue is coming up now. It's been 40 years since the Supreme Court has really, you know, weighed in on juvenile confessions and voluntariness, particularly with those with limited mental capacity. So, I mean, it works out in Brendan's favor that this is going to be the time that his case is going to be deemed what they call ripe. That's something that the Supreme Court, you know, a terminology they use when they're determining whether or not to take cases when they grant a writ and stuff like that. And the thing that's going to work for Brendan is that his case is very ripe. It's extremely ripe. It is, everything about it is ripe. Everybody's paying attention at it, looking at it. You know, it has a lot of people's attention. It shows a lot of things, you know, that have been done wrong in this interrogation. And if nothing else, we need to at least send the message to the state of Wisconsin that this is not the way you can interrogate juveniles, and to anywhere else in the country, really. I mean, not just Wisconsin, but obviously since we're dealing with Wisconsin right now at the moment, I say Wisconsin, but really anywhere else in the country where they're dealing with juveniles the same way that they would deal with adult suspects. No, you guys are doing it wrong. Everything shows, all of the studies, all of the information that's been collected, what DNA is teaching us about how many murder confessions end up being false, you know, not true confessions, that they're completely false. All the things that we're learning, we have to look at that. We can't just, you know, there's so many people out there that seem to want to put their blinders on. No, I don't see that. I don't see that. No, you can't do that. You got to look at it. It is what it is. We got to make sure that our justice system is working to get it right, and that it's looking at what the obvious, you know, empirical data is telling us. You know, so that's about it for today. For this, the trainers of law enforcement amicus brief, and obviously we'll be back for one more, which is the amicus brief that is filed by the Collection of the Innocence Projects. But until then, we'll see you. Okay, so that wraps up the law enforcement trainers brief. Hope you guys found it interesting. I really like the Wicklander Zawalski over there. I even follow them on Twitter, so if you guys want to go find them on Twitter, you can. Wicklander Zawalski is the place that does the law enforcement training and stuff like that. So you know, I hope you guys all found it very informative and interesting. That's about it for today. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.